Rolling, rolling, rolling.
Get your engine rolling, rawhide.
Okay, so how well, let's talk about how the podcast came about.
I would love to talk about the podcast and how it became about because it came from you and your book that you're writing,
Yeah,
which you're super excited about.
super excited about it. I actually took a writer's workshop all this past weekend. Louise Hayes writer's workshop. It
Ooh.
was really cool.
So, were you looking for some clarity or some just editing or just ways to craft different ideas?
Oh, yeah, no, just tips and tricks. I mean, that's actually one thing that I learned. She said, like there was, I don't know, a couple thousand people on the Zoom, and then there was these different teachers from Hayes House, marketing people and editors and all this stuff. Anyway, she said, do not edit your manuscript as you write. Just get it
Oh,
all, because you never finish it.
right,
And then
right.
she also said to use Scrivener, which is a writing tool. And so I'd use Pages. So I got this writing tool, and I was up till like 1 a.m. last night putting my book in there. And it was great because it puts it into chapters, and you can move you can move everything around. So that was
Oh, so
so.
it's not just like writing from top to bottom on a new document. It actually kind of smart
Yeah.
organizes.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's smart. You put it, you do it, but then
Okay,
you can also move it around.
gotcha, gotcha. Right on.
So, and instead of when you do in a Word document or Pages, it's just all one thing, and you have to keep scrolling back and forth and back and forth and up and down.
Right,
Or if
right.
you do different, yeah. So this is all, yeah. So that was worth, yeah, $49, and yeah. I and they. What I love about the Hay House people is they're like, they feel like everybody has a book in them, and everybody's born, feels like they were born to write something, right?
Oh, very cool.
And that's really cool. And there's a writing competition and all that. And so, years ago felt like I would someday write a book, and started several times, and it just never felt right. It was like I'd write like, for one evening, and I'd write a couple chapters, and it was no flow, and it wasn't easy. And at this point in my life, things have to be easy, and
No,
in the flow,
yeah.
and so yeah, so I started writing during the quarantine, and I'm going strong now. And I was telling a couple of people about my book, specifically my friend Sarah, who's written a couple of books, and she and I kept saying Turning Point. And she goes, well, the title of your book is Turning Point. And then Colleen's like, no, it's got to be Turning Points. So anyways, that was the title.
Oh,
And then, and then I started asking people, including you, this question, like at what point, was there a thought or a feeling, or was there a point in time that you can remember that what you were taught as a child just didn't sit right with you anymore?
yeah. Yeah, it didn't serve, or you, I think we've had about, I don't know, 4 or 5 conversations about it now. The last time that resonated was you, you asked the same question, but I think that the wording was, when did you realize it didn't resonate with you? Or when did you realize that something was off about, or even just present or aware to the moment when you just started questioning or realizing that there was a disconnect in that, well, I as an observer am realizing that there is something called my programming or my teaching or my upbringing, and this observer that's questioning that, that was kind of what triggered it for me. And I'm sure there's a million different ways to frame that question, but
Well, I think everybody. Well, already, like I posted the question on Facebook,
yeah,
last month, and then I've asked, friends and family members, because as soon as you tell them that, I mean, that's the human mind. It starts thinking about your reference point right away, anyway, right? Like, okay, when did that start for me?
yeah,
And so we all have this filter, and so we hear the question, and what's been interesting is that people will respond in ways that am surprised. Like I don't necessarily feel like the question was asked in that way.
Right.
Anyways, and then I would say I would try to help them narrow it down because they'd go into this big long story about their lifelong drama fucking story. It's like that's not really what I was going for, but
Well, I mean, that's the funny thing. I mean, it took me. I mean, shit, it took me 4 or 5 conversations and 3 trips into Nashville before I think whittled it down to, maybe the first time I recognized there was a difference between my experience and that which I was programmed by. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure, I mean, you know me, I like a good story and I'll go into it. Like the first time you asked me, I'm sure I was like, well, it all started at 6th grade. I was on a nature walk, and it's like, well, because you're trying to recollect and dive in the well of memories, because it's hard to differentiate, I think, between memories of your objective self and then memories of your program self or whatever. I mean, how do you put that? But yeah, it is easy to go into the story and what it means to you and where that comes from. And I need to get out on the Facebook and see. I just sounded like a dad. I need to get on
the Facebook.
I need to get on the social medias. I need to get on the Facebook. I need to read some people's stories, because I think our last conversation when I was talking and you were like, I just had an epiphany. I had an idea. We need to start a podcast. I remember that moment, and I feel like part of the conversation was, is there a common thread, or what if there is a mechanism that either triggers that that awareness or that feeling or what that experience, like what is it that happens that all of a sudden you realize your programming isn't right or doesn't work for you or doesn't resonate, or how many years does that take, or what is it ultimately that is the undercurrent for that all to happen? So I'm curious to see if there's a common thread with people and what they experience in that.
Yeah, and what they hear, and what I feel, the teacher in me goes to, the people that have kind of done the work, they can hone in a little bit better.
Sure.
And the people that are sort of new on the path, they're the ones that kind of tend to go in the story more, which is all, it's all fine. It's just interesting.
Right.
But I'm hoping that first of all and foremost, we just love talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean,
podcast so we could just
so we could connect, because you live in freaking Wisconsin and I live in Nashville, and
yeah. So all you people listening have to deal with that.
yeah. So we just like to talk about this stuff, and the people that come to see us at Ivy House and stuff, they love to talk about it too, and we have a lot of friends on the journey. But I also do feel like it could help people hone in on their journey and on the twists and turns, because the way it came about for me is been writing my memoirs and looking back, it's like, oh my gosh, the turns and the twists along the way of my journey have been like this divine orchestration that I could have never come up with myself. It's like I thought I was doing it all along, and now looking back in hindsight, it's like all these turning points, these ahas that are just, like I said, it's like, I don't know any other way to describe it, like divinely orchestrated. So, that's what I saw, is how meant to be everything was, and how I realized many years ago I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, and it's all, everything is perfect and divinely, my life is I'm where I should be. But I feel like that's even more of a confirmation when you can look back and see where it all started in the different points. So that's why we're having the conversation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a pretty trippy conversation, because when you say you recognize aspects or the whole of your life have been divinely orchestrated, that I think some people who really like control would take that as pre-determinism, or like your life is predetermined. And I don't know if it's that simple. Like the orchestration kind of moves with you as you grow and evolve, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, it's an odd orchestration because it seems like as you gain awareness of yourself, your higher self, I suppose, or your connected to your connectedness to the higher consciousness, the more you realize how little control you really do have. You really only have control of how present you stay in each moment, and then it becomes a somewhat of a play, or like you know, an orchestration is that's a great word for it because it's just life
S-
experience is just kind of intertwining, and some are harmonious, some are discordant. I don't know if that's the right word. I'm a musician. I should know that right, the right word. But you know, you kind of recognize those two things happening simultaneously, and you just kind of want to listen and to the orchestra of your own life. And it's, but yeah, the turning points might be these profound moments of realization of how important it is to stay in awareness of that. Maybe, I don't know. That's just a guess.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we remember in our life, you remember birthday parties and Christmases and surprise parties and firings from jobs and hiring from jobs. And you remember these points not because they're significant, but because you were aware they
Mm.
were significant at the time, and so you think it's the event, but it's actually your awareness, your present moment awareness. You're fully there. You're not thinking about 10 other things when you get this
Yeah.
news or you're having this experience, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, so we're able to see, I think, the turning points a little more clearly because of that. So, but yeah, we'll start with asking the question with each other because we want to hear our own stories too. And we'll start with that in our conversations with our guests. You know, where did it begin with you? Because I remember I've asked a couple of people this. Well, I've asked many people this over the last couple of months, and some people it's like a feeling.
Mhm.
Some people it's a specific point in time. And anyway, yeah, it'll be really interesting to hear
Oh yeah, man.
everybody's. Yeah, we'll start with that original, if they can remember, you know.
Well, I imagine that's going to be, well, I suppose people will have a little bit of heads up on what turning points is or what the conversation is before they jump in. But well, I think it'll be really interesting to watch people maybe stumble through recollecting, well, I've never thought about that, or what was it, you know, or this and that. And I'm sure there's going to be a, you know, a variety of different ways people, you know, but I imagine that people that have a spiritual committed experience or process would have would have perhaps dove into that question at some point or many times in their life, you know, in their existential crises or whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll see. I mean, I think people have maybe not thought about it in those terms, but it
Sure.
is a
Right. Right.
significant
Right.
time. Like, because I didn't even think about it until I started writing about it, and it was
Yeah.
like, oh, everything changed at this point. And
Yeah.
so for me, there was two times early on. For me, there was, well, I remember being born. I remember before I was born, and that that's and so I was always a spiritual little kid because of that. Like I kind of remember where we came from and why we're all here. Do you think that'll freak people out to hear that?
Yes, but some, whatever. I mean, I'm sure I have plenty of experiences to speak that will freak people out way more than that. I mean, I think that's hard for people to chew on because of, again, the programming that says you don't even have memories until whatever.
Right.
It's like, well, that's kind of the point. That's kind of the point here is there's like human being social programming, and then there's something else that we have a whole bunch of books that talk about. It's spiritual awareness and
Consciousness.
consciousness. You know, it's this field that, I mean, I don't know that we have a lot of data that explains exactly what is possible or potential within the.
No, the philosophers have been talking about it for hundreds and hundreds of
Right.
years. It's unborn, it never dies.
Right.
Wind cannot wet, you know, water cannot, wind cannot touch, water cannot wet. That's a poem.
Yeah. So I mean, if that's what it is, if that's all it is, it's something that water can't wet. But I mean, if that's the, I mean that when you say that, like, yeah, that is the essence of it, right? I mean, it's something that is it's intangible. How could you start to begin to put restrictions on something that you can't even really wrap your head around? So yes, I'm sure some people at first would be like, well, there's no way you could have done that. Well, consciousness would say otherwise, because consciousness was and is and will always be,
And
no
it will
matter
always
what.
be. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's going to be more fun to perhaps watch people. You remember before you were born? Oh, how is that possible? It's like, well,
I don't know.
which is funny because I mean, we live in a society where the Christian faith says all things are possible through Christ or through God. So it's like I'm just I'm just going off of what you're saying too, and to a certain degree. It's like all things are possible. That's true through consciousness. It's surprising to me that people would be uncomfortable with something happening.
Well, I'm hoping the people that find us, they're not uncomfortable with it. They'll think it's pretty cool and maybe they'll have their own story about it. I mean,
Oh,
that's,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So I remembered before I was born. Do you want to hear about that?
I do. I totally went on a ramble there, and I apologize for making it
Oh,
that.
that's not like you.
You'll you'll all see. The tangents are
The tangents are endless.
they're undying. So yes.
Okay, so yeah, so I've always had this memory of being put in an incubator, and I was 3 weeks premature, and back in the '60s, early '60s, and so the incubators look very different than they do now. So I was always able to draw the incubator for my mom, and the memory that I have that I've always had since I can remember, and I remember a lot when I was little. I remember being consciousness, like not in a body, being consciousness, and there was like a light that sort of was like God, but it was all part of us. And then I had my friends and stuff around, but there was no bodies, and it felt normal though. And I remember being very excited about where I was going, and I remembered that I was gonna live a life of service and spirituality, and I was very excited about that. And then I remember saying goodbye. And
Oh.
then I woke up and there was all these masks around me. And then they put me in an incubator. And then the lights went out, and I don't remember. And then I remember clearly when I was 3 or 4 years old, sitting at the table. I think I was maybe three, sitting at the table. My dad was getting ready for work. It was like 5:30 or 6 in the morning. It was still dark out. And I remember like I was sitting in kind of like a high chair. So I must have been barely three. And I was eating raspberry toast. This is like it was yesterday. This is how clear this memory is.
Okay.
And I said to my dad, I'm like, do you remember when you were my age? And he said, well, I remember. I have some memories when I was young. And then I thought to myself, at 3 years old, this is where this awareness comes in, like, because a 3 or 4 year old doesn't think this way. But I was thinking, I want to remember this moment for the rest of my life. So when I'm my dad's age, which, he was only, 30 at the time, I want to remember when I'm his age, and I remember this, and I stood, and I didn't stand. I was on my high chair. I stared at my raspberry toast for like a full minute, and I just was quiet and silent and didn't say anything. And I just stared at my toast, and I'm like, I'm going to remember this moment, and I have, and that's mindfulness. That's
Yeah.
present moment awareness. That's what I was doing.
Yeah.
So that wasn't my 4-year-old brain. That's the mechanism we're talking about: awareness, consciousness, present moment, all those words. And so that's just always been there for me. So I was a very spiritual little child, and I wanted to talk about God all the time, and I wanted to go to church all the time. And we were kind of raised Catholic, and so I was brought to the Catholic Church, and I went to Catholic school when I was young, and I loved the nuns. And one day, the nun came in and she said, "We're going to go to the chapel. There's a funeral going on, and there's a woman in her 60s. She's a grandmother, and she fell down the stairs." Telling us, I'm 4 years old, right? The nun's like, she fell down the stairs and she died. And so her body is in the chapel, and you can see the body. It's just like it's not a big deal. It's just a shell, and her soul is now with God. So, I'm curious. I'm four, right? And I follow the other kids in there, and I still remember that casket and looking at that lifeless face. And I screamed and I ran out of church, and I didn't go back to church for a long time. And I didn't want to go, I wasn't as in love with going to church on Sundays anymore. And until, so that was the first thing that kind of turned me away from loving church and following it and wanting to be a nun. And then the other, I think I was about 9 or 10 years old, and I was curious about the communion aspect.
Mm.
And so I was kind of wanting to maybe go back to church, because I was like, why did they get to go up and drink that stuff and eat that thing? And my mom's like, oh, well, if you do that, you have to talk to a priest and do a confession. And I was 9 or 10. It's like, what does that mean? Well, you have to talk to a priest so you can talk to God. And I was like, what do you mean, talk to a priest so I can talk? Well, that's the only. The Catholic Church believes you have to talk to a priest to talk to God. And it didn't make sense to me at all. And I was like, I've been talking to God in my head for my whole life. Like, why would I need to talk to a priest? And then I was no longer interested. And so that was like a major turning point for me, to help me find God within myself and not follow the religious sort of way.
Got
And so I love all religions. I married a Hindu for a short time, and so I was kind of Hindu by marriage. And I'm really digging Buddhism these days, and I love Christ. I mean, he was amazing, and his teachings are incredible. And I have felt the Christ energy within me, over the years many times. So that was my big turning point. Of course, then I've had many along the way, but that was like my original big one.
I mean, that's well, for a 4-year-old to see a dead body.
Yeah, and it took me 40 years. I had a friend of mine, and she was 57, so she's the same age as I am now. She passed away 3 years ago of lung cancer. And so she's Jewish, and so they keep the body where they pass away in the home for
Oh,
like 24 hours.
yeah.
And so we were all there, and food, and her kids were there, and then her body was up in the bedroom. They had bathed her in makeup and all this. There was a girl that did that there. And then I made a point of going up by myself, because I was terrified. I was and so I did all my ujjayi, my yoga breathing, and I was like, I can do this. This is ridiculous. I'm, 54 years old right now. And so I walked in, and at first I got that same like feeling, and like that PTSD of being four. And like at first it was like, oh, and I just kept breathing, and I just looked at the floor, and I'd glance up just a few times before I got, and then more and more and more and more. And then finally I was able to just look right at her and say, hey, Karen,
Wow.
cool.
Man, that's trippy. That is I've always been adverse to funerals. In fact, I've only been to one funeral my
In your
entire,
life.
and I can relate to that I don't know, it's not a fear, or it's like it's startling it would be startling for me to see a human body lifeless, unanimated, completely, no movement whatsoever. That would be really difficult. I mean, and I'm 34, so like I couldn't imagine at 4 having presence of mind to really take in what's going on and see something like that. That would just destroy me too. I wouldn't know what to do with that. That would certainly be a turning point for me.
Yeah, it was odd, but I made myself like get comfortable with it in the room with Karin in the bedroom, and I stayed up there for like 10 minutes and kept staring at her, so it was like to get over that feeling because it's just like it is. It's just like a suit.
Yes.
There's a new Ram Dass movie called Becoming Nobody. You have to watch it. And he starts off the whole first 10 minutes about talking about how when we're born, we're given this spacesuit.
Mm.
And it's like a metaphor for a suit. And he's like, I never felt comfortable in my spacesuit. I never liked it. Other people said they liked my spacesuit, but I never did, and that kind of thing of, and then, yeah, then the movie's called Becoming Nobody. So it's, that's a good one. So, so yeah, I made myself stare and get comfortable with it because death, I now believe after going through my father's passing a year and a half ago and being able to be with him and doing the medical assistance in dying where they plan when the needle is going to come, and so we're all there holding hands. After going through that, I've always believed that I've had this thought that death and birth are both just beautiful. They're just different ends of the same spectrum. They're like I've always felt I don't have a problem with death at all.
Yeah.
Like my dad's passing, I thought was really beautiful. He was 85. He was finally out of his suffering. He was ready to go, and I was so happy for him to finally be free.
Right. Right.
So happy for him to be free, because he had a lot of emotional pain in his life, and then towards the end, a lot of physical pain. But yeah, I feel like it's going home, and we don't celebrate it like celebrate the life. Like I feel like that's the way it should be. I wish we did that in our culture.
Yeah, we definitely walk towards death with a lot of fear. It is, I mean, we even carry the fear of death when we could be not even close to, to our time to die. I mean, we 20s and 30s, people live their life like, well, yeah, everything's terror, everything's fear, everything is, well, you can't do that because you might die. It's like, well, at some point, like, where do you draw the line where you have to take in experiences, and obviously don't go to the extreme. I'm sure, I'm sure, skydiving every single weekend for 5 years is going to put you a lot closer to death. But, we definitely have an aversion to it. And I've had that experience with my grandpa. He's in his 90s, and the last 4 years, as you know, I've built some houses with him and spent a lot of time with him. And he's a man of faith. He's been to church his whole life, and even his dad, he remembers as a kid, never worked on Sunday because you go to church, and that's God's day. And you know, he- he's intellectually content with dying. He knows it's coming. He knows he's very close to it, and yet there is a fear of, and I imagine the fear is more of his projection of what happens next. What is after death? Is there anything after death? And that's what, we talk about Ram Dass and the becoming nobody. It's like, well, yeah, life is this amazing adventure, and it's meant to be experienced, and it's you try to take in as much as you can, but ultimately it's a preparation for the death process, because it's the inevitable. It's the only thing that we absolutely 100% know for sure. Done. One day, done. It's over, so it's a preparation. I think you need to prepare well for death. I think that's important in life. And that sounds like you had the opportunity with your dad to prepare him and yourself and your family and everybody around for that time in
Yeah.
a healthy way.
Yeah, it was an amazing gift, amazing experience, and and I also feel like people don't think about it enough. Like there are some people that live in fear, so and that fear they don't realize is a fear of death,
Right.
and it might be more of a fear of being hurt, but they do say that fear of death. Most people have fear of death, but I feel like it's so not a part of our culture because we worship youth and beauty so much, and we have old people are in retirement homes and in retirement communities. They're not like, in India, it's like the elderly are everywhere and
Right.
they have multi-generational families and
Gotcha.
And so, I mean, aging, and there is suffering in this world, and we do age, and but we don't believe we're going to age. you know, like I seriously didn't think I was ever going to get old until I turned 40 or even 45, and
Right.
my skin started to change. And I was like, "What the fuck?" Like, I didn't think this was going to happen to me. Um, yeah, so I think it's an important part of life is to be okay with death, and even even embrace it.
Yeah. Meg and I, we're hitting our mid 30s, and we are starting to see the early stages of our body's betrayal.
Yeah, yeah.
And, and we're very, very present to each other's aging. And just little things like getting ready, or about to take a shower. It's like, I saw you getting in the shower, and I don't know if you know this, but you're getting old. It's like she's like very quick to point out, like, you're just not young anymore. Like, it's almost like when you look at like young kids, when like they hit a certain stage where, like, our 8-year olds, it's like I can see what she's gonna look like when she's 12. Like, it's like there's this like thing that happens where there's this visual of like, oh my God, you're gonna be this in 4 or 5 years, whatever. And that's kind of happening with us in our mid 30s. Like, oh, you're on your way to looking like that, and it's kind of funny, but we're embracing it. I mean, we
Anything else is insanity.
well, anything else would be insanity. Like, no, I'm not. And I would love to pretend I'm going to go work out and try to, like, tighten up everything and get real fit, and and not. I don't like working out that much, so I'm
I
not.
hate working out.
I don't like it. I don't like running. I'd rather just go for a hike or chop some wood.
Me too. Me too.
It's we'll call it maintenance, but we're having fun with that, because we've really accepted that. And she's had 3 kids. What do you think's going to happen? It's just very natural, and she's very open and accepting about it, and it's fun to make fun of each other about it, because it's just like, in our jest, it's an acceptance of what
That's
I'm.
awesome.
So it is fun, but I'll see how I feel in about 15 years.
Exactly. There's a new level about every 10 years. There's like this quantum leap that happens. It's like you kind of get used to it, and then all of a sudden, year 10 is like, okay, that's happening now. And so, but it is the most natural thing. I feel like we do age. You're meant to sort of get right with where you're going as you get older. Even though there are plenty of people that die when they're young, the natural order of things is, things age. They're new, then they have a life, and then they die. All of nature has that. And so, when a human being, as we age, our body slows down, and I always tell my mom, it's like, you know you're supposed to get right with where you're going. If you're cool with what happens after you die, or you're comfortable with that's you have the time, you're retired, you don't have to work anymore, your body is slowing down, you're not supposed to be as active, you're not supposed to as want to do as many things as you did before. And so, yeah, so that part I have down. That part.
Well, I like that. I like the get right with where you're going. I mean, that's a cool statement to live with. I mean, it's staying present with the trajectory, but not getting totally
Yes.
with the projection and the what you expect to come. It's there. And that's one of the things, is like, have no expectations. It's like, well, I mean, if I get it, like, yeah, no expectations, but like, I'm gonna die, and before that happens, I'm gonna get old. That's inevitable. I there's nothing I can do to change that happening. So it's a weird thing. It's like, it's a natural process that you're allowed to kind of project on. I'm not project on, like, completely, like, I'm not exactly going to get this old, but like, I look at my grandparents, I look at my parents, and there's a certain trend to that. But it's just, again, it's about accepting where you're aiming, or where nature is aiming you. Really, right? I mean, nature is aiming you towards death. I I might not choose to go that path, but it is what it is. So it's fun. But I like that. Get right with where you're going. So,
Nice. Nice. So, what's your turning point, Sean?
oh, so many. There was a turning point of I use this. I use this for a long time. I didn't until you framed it like that. I love the way the framing of that question of what was your turning point. For I always thought it was in sixth grade that we did this nature walk. I'm going to give you the as abbreviated version as possible.
As Sean Ron can.
I can. Um, but we did this nature walk. There was like this weekend retreat. It was like a camping kind of a thing. And the first night we went on this night walk, the whole, all three classes from my sixth grade class. And there was a point where I remember either kind of passing out or I know I stumbled, I fell, but I don't remember falling, but I remember kind of like gasping for air and like kind of coming to. And it was startling to me because I don't remember actually what happened that I fell. And the breath, the gasping of air was really, really unique. I remember that the most about that time was, it was a, like when you're woken up by something abruptly, in a deep sleep, which should not have happened because I was walking, So I always use that as that's the moment where I recognized that I was aware. I remember being aware that I was aware that this was happening, and I actually had to go home early because I had some this is weird, but I had some weird bumps on my foot, and I don't know if it was from moisture. Or I went to the doctor and they couldn't really figure out what happened. I had some kind of foot thing happen, and so I had to leave. I didn't get to do the last day.
So you've told me this story before. So you had to go home because of the foot thing, but you didn't go home because you fell and you were gasping for breath. That's what.
Right. Nope. Nope.
Why? Okay. So did I miss something? Did you just was anybody else around?
We're just walking in a line,
And
and
so people saw. So you just fell.
yeah, what was weird was for me, I was like, "What the hell?" And everybody else seemed to witness me just trip.
Okay.
Yeah, the kids around me just seemed to be like, "Oh, why'd you trip, clumsy?" And then I continued walking.
But it was a big deal. It almost sounds to me like like time slowed down and like you were watching yourself.
Yes, that's what it because I don't remember actually falling. I only remember getting up. So it was weird for me because I had this profound questioning, and that questioning resonated as I continued to walk. I was like, what just happened? Kind of a state of mind. And of course I'm in sixth grade. I can articulate it now, but at the time I do remember it being kind of this momentous thing that was profound for me, but everybody around me was like any normal day. It did seem like I was experiencing something completely different from everybody else around me.
Yeah. Yeah.
That space.
You had something internal happen for sure.
Oh yeah, I mean it was almost as if I had never taken a breath until that moment. And I remember I do remember having, as I was walking, just really taking in nature and the air and everything else. It was
Well, maybe you're a walk-in. You ever heard of that?
I have heard of that. Actually, I have an old friend, neighbor of mine that wrote books about walk-ins, the walk-in.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I mean that was one thing that I always, and that's about as far. You talk about having memories of jelly toast and really having that. Oh, is it jelly?
Raspberry jam.
Raspberry jam. I messed that up. I was listening. I was really listening. But that was the first time now I remember having memories. Everything before that, it's like I can intellectualize the memory, but I don't embody the memory before that. But the last time we were talking, I had a similar experience with church. I was non-denominational, and as a kid, probably 10 years old. So this would have been right before this, a couple years before this. I had to go to church. My mom go to church. My mom went to church. So we all three of our me and my brothers had to go to church. That was just something we did. And my dad never went to church. And looking back, I do remember questioning that or thinking that at that time. I don't know. I don't have any like explicit memories of it per se. Like I don't have this one thing. It was just always this battle, I remember. But I do have memory of the thought of like, how does this even make sense? Like, and I think the way I expressed it to you was I it was really difficult for me to wrap my head around why my dad, who is the father figure, who is essentially your God, like that as a young boy, especially like your dad that's it. That's the pinnacle of, existence on earth because it just, a father means so much at that, stage of your life. And here's my God, my father figure, God hierarchy telling me I had to do something that he wouldn't otherwise participate with. There had to have been a disconnect for him not to go. I'm sure I couldn't articulate this at the time, but now I look back at it and I know that there must have been a mechanism at play where he didn't feel like he needed this. And the only reason he was making me go was to appease my mom. What is that about? How can that exist? And I remember all I could do at that time would just say, no, I don't want to go. That's as like a 10-year-old, just, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. Dad doesn't go. I don't want to go, and then it's, well, you have to go, you have to go, you have to go. But I remember having, vague memories or experiences. And I even stayed in the church all the way until about sophomore, junior year. I was very active in like the youth band and, very active in the church, went to plenty of, church camps, all that kind of stuff. And I've had some very profound experiences within the church. I've had experiences, you ask, if people are going to be weirded out about, you having memories before birth, but I've had experiences of, Holy Spirit filling me up and speaking tongues, and still to this day have that, that ability or gift or curse or whatever, however it manifests itself. So, I mean, I've had very, very spiritual experiences, but they have all been when spirit takes over my individual awareness. And I get into that very, very conscious state. And the first time I spoke tongues was a moment where it was like I think we were playing Truth or Dare in the back of the church van on the way back from a trip, and finally I was just like, this can't be the right thing for us to be doing as a group on this trip for what and I said we should just pray. So yes, I mean the religious setting was the conduit or the set and setting for it, but it had nothing to do about religion at that moment. It was just doing the right thing and having awareness on the present moment and really being genuine in that space and calling out the bullshit that we were doing, So it's weird to have had these moments through church, but also at this point, I don't resonate with that faith for me anymore as far as a participant goes. But I agree with you very much the same way. It's any spiritual practice or commitment that's going to bring you to a higher awareness on your path has to have merit. It's kind of just that simple, and then the minutia and all the traps that you can get fucked up with on the way are all present in all of them too, but yeah, that's kind of the couple like early young turning points I would say in my experience.
I was doing my research for podcasts. I was listening to Melissa McCarthy being interviewed by, have you listened to the Smartless guys yet?
No, I
The
haven't.
Jason Bateman, man, they're great. I mean, I think they only have like, I don't know, 10 or 15 episodes, if that. out.
Okay.
Like they haven't been doing it for that long, but they're good. They're good together. They're really good buddies, and yeah, and they talk over each other a little bit, but they're getting more of the hang of it, and they're good interviewers, and they bring on good guests. Anyway, so they brought on Melissa McCarthy, and Jason Bateman and her have known each other for
Oh yeah.
like 20
Yeah.
years or something, or 25 years. And so she was saying how, and I keep picking up the podcasts have nothing to do with the topic turning points, but somehow they've talked about their turning point from religion. And so Melissa McCarthy, she was like in Catholic schools like forever, and Jason Bateman's like, well, did you like that? Like, did you resonate with it? And she's like, no. She's like, I was we're finally in grade 3. We got to do a world religion class. And I asked the nun, well, what made you want to become a nun? And the nun said, well, God just never told me otherwise. And Catholic. I think a nun and Catholic. Why did you become a Catholic? God never told me otherwise. And she's like, well, why doesn't God tell everybody else in the world
That's
otherwise?
yeah.
like, like the Africans and the Indians and stuff.
Yeah.
And so she asked that, and the nun's like, go to the principal's office. You're nothing like your sister.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and that's, I think my first thought was, did you ever ask if you shouldn't be a Catholic? And not that people shouldn't be Catholic, not that, any of that, but like, I think the point is healthy questioning, you know?
And some people, that's the thing is, because we both know religious people, that they don't question, they don't want to question, then that's totally fine.
Yes.
It's like, and that's what interests me about this, like, and now why we talk about not just the original turning point, but what's the mechanism
Yeah.
has that happen? Like that'll be an interesting question to ask Werner,
Yes.
who we're having on next Monday.
Yes.
Very excited for you to meet him.
Yes.
And to see what he says about what that mechanism is.
Right. Well, and that's the funny thing is, I I think I've for many, many years got caught up in I would consider the rigidity of not questioning your faith or religion or, and just buying into it or, in that situation, did you ever ask God if you should not be a Catholic? I would look at that as very rigid. And yet, as we both know, I I have gotten completely caught up in and uh, almost completely disabled by my own questioning to the point where it became uh, destructive or not really destructive, but just counterintuitive. And it just looped around and around and around. And it created this hamster wheel of questioning that ultimately, if you don't get the answer, or maybe you get an answer, at some point you have to accept that answer is an answer that's worthy of being the answer, because I think that's been my issue, my struggle, as you have watched painfully, I'm sure, uh, is okay. I hear you. I hear the answer. Okay, I got the answer. Are you sure? It's are you really sure? Oh, well, but how am I sure that like where this answer is coming from is, the Almighty, And so it's like it's funny how we can very easily judge other people's experiences when we project like, well, that's rigid. Well, you're running on a fucking hamster wheel, So at some point we have to just accept that, well, you got the answer you need for now, and that's going to take you where it takes you. That's your path. Um, I've gotten plenty of answers and just chose to really ignore the shit out of them for many years, or just not settled with it. And to each his path, to each his or her path, rather. So
The Pathless Path. That was the name of my first publishing company. The Pathless Path.
oh, that sounds about right.
The Pathless Path Publishing.
Well, how do we where do we go then? What's the path? Like, how do we get there then?
Yeah. And some people need that. Like that's the thing is that some people are very comfortable with religion and they need that structure and it's awesome. And if you start to look at the mysticism of the religions. They're all very similar.
Yeah,
You know, where they actually came from and stuff. I've been listening to a lot of that in podcasts this week too.
I believe it.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, that's going to be fun to find the core. You had more of a Catholic upbringing. I had a non-denominational. I'm sure we're going to find people of all different backgrounds, religious or otherwise. It'll be really interesting to see if there's a common thread through all of that in the
yeah,
experience of awareness.
yeah.
So I'm excited.
Awesome. I'm excited too. So next week we have Werner.
Yes.
And Werner lived in silence and in caves in India. He's been living in India. He's in his 60s, he's 68, 67 maybe. And he's a Swiss German guy who's been living in India since he was like 22 or 23 years old.
Wow.
And he'll tell more of his story, but basically he lived in silence for at least 20 years, like off and on, not all in one go, but like
Okay.
7 years twice, I think he did, and then 5 years another time. But in silence, in caves, meditating. And he lives in Tiruvannamalai, where Sachi and I have the orphanage. And
Okay.
he, yeah, I've known him since 2005, and he's been one of my main teachers. And he does a satsang, which sat means truth, and a sung is gathering. So he does like a satsang on. He usually does it in person in India,
Okay.
but he does it on Zoom now. He does the guru does it on Zoom.
I am both impressed and just ashamed that that's where we've come to as a culture. I can't imagine Zoom anywhere the same energy and presence as actually being in that space.
Well, that's the thing of being with him, and any, teacher, any teacher, not just a holy teacher, but any teacher in person, of course, is optimal. But we're not sure when we're going to be able to do that again.
I
I
know,
mean, hopefully next year, but we don't know for sure. So
right?
for now, we'll use Zoom. And yeah, so we're having him. So I'm excited for you to meet him. So we'll start off with that question
Yep.
with him, and then I mean, I'm sure he'll. And if you have any lifelong spiritual questions you want to ask him,
How do I ever?
but I'm interested about that mechanism, like, because I kind of know his story already of when he started when he was young. He was drawn to yoga when he was really young, but then, yeah, the mechanism of how he describes that
Well, yeah.
consciousness, that grace, that.
I mean, what turning point would be strong enough to make you go meditate in a cave for years in silence? I'm sure that's something I have to hear about. So I'm sure
Yeah.
it's really cool to hear him. The little I've heard you talk about him, or seen passing comments or whatever. He's just a very peaceful, gentle speaker. So I'm looking forward to that.
Great. Well, this has been fun.
Yes.
Always.
Always fun, man. Well, I'm looking forward to it. We'll connect, and then in the meantime, I'm sure I'll be anxiously awaiting the conversation.
Okay.
All right,
Bye.
love.
Love ya.